Hi, it's Bible in 1 year on day 153 today, 31st of January, payday. Ooh. Today's scriptures are 2 Samuel 2 verse 8 to 3:21, John chapter 21 verse 1 to 25, and Psalm 69 verse 1 to 12. If we look at the Old Testament first in Samuel, this scripture is basically going on about how Israel is divided at this time. Saul had part of Israel, and David was king over the tribe of Judah. I never really noticed that before, that it wasn't all or nothing. David had part of it. He only had one of the tribes of Judah, which was actually the largest tribe. And Saul, and now Saul's son, was king over the rest of Israel. And in this part of scripture, it's basically just the two sides having to go at each other in constant battles and fighting, and it's quite bloody and gory. In verse 16, it goes on about one of the fights that they had, or the battles, and it said that each one grabbed the opponent's head and thrust his sword into the side, and both keeled over virtually and died. And I'm like, that's a really pretty picture, isn't it? But if you like your blood and guts, this is a good chapter to read. Yeah, so it's basically just fighting going on between the house of Israel, between the different tribes. And it says that Abner, which was the commander of Saul's army, basically put Saul's son in charge after Saul had died. And just another verse in here that I picked out, which I hadn't really noticed before, but read up on, where it was saying in chapter 3 verse 7 and 8, where Saul's son had asked Abner why he had virtually gone after Saul's concubine. You think, oh, that's just a silly little thing. But in the footnotes of my Bible, it actually says that concubine in those days was passed down. So it was basically a bit like an heirloom. When Saul died, that concubine should have been passed down to his son. Just like we might pass down a teacup or cups and saucer that we might have had from our great auntie or whatever. So yeah, so Saul's son should have had that concubine, and by Abner going after him instead, it's basically saying he's taken the place and the authority of what Saul's son should have had. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So after the fighting, later on in chapter 3, Abner decides to defer and he goes over to David's side. So he takes the tribes that, virtually the rest of the tribes of Israel, away from Saul's son, which is a really funny name, which I probably can't say properly. Ishbosheth, maybe. But anyway, he takes the rest of the tribes and he defers and goes and joins David's camp. So later on you'll read that in other chapters that David eventually is king over the whole of the tribes of Israel, not just Judah. It just made me thinking that if someone can defer so easily from one tribe to another, are we going to be like that sometimes with God, that we can to and fro quite easily? And it's good to just own up to our mistakes, and when we've sinned, and just say, yeah, we've been on the wrong side. We've been following the wrong things. We've been on the wrong side. But when we realize we've messed up and that there is a better way, that we can say, yeah, actually your way is better, and I'm going to come over to your way of thinking, God. And I know that's quite quick on the Old Testament, but it basically is just that those scriptures are going on about the fighting between the tribes of Israel and how they were in discord, and they just weren't getting on at that time. And yeah, that was it really. Then the New Testament was John 21 verse 1 to 25, and it's the last chapter of John. Lots of churches like to use the whole gospel really, as an outreach, because they think it's that John was possibly the closest disciple to Jesus. And it's the last chapter, and Jesus has been showing himself to his disciples on a couple of occasions after his resurrection. And this is the occasion where they've been fishing. I'm just going to turn this. So yeah, they think Jesus has died, or they know he's died, and I like the way where Simon Peter says to the rest of the disciples, "I'm going fishing," and I just thought it sort of says, "I'm going back to do what I know what to do." That Jesus is gone. Maybe they think that this is the end. This is the end of Christianity. This is the end of the ministry, and we don't know what we're going to do. So I'm going to go back to what I know, what I'm doing, and go back to my old sort of lifestyle. And it's just so important that we don't get to think that way, that we slip back into old habits. But just because things might not be going how we want them to, just remember that Jesus isn't dead, that he is alive, that he is resurrected, and just don't slip back into old patterns, but keep going on. And so Jesus comes onto the beach, and he's saying, "Have you got any food?" And they said, "No, we've been out all night and we haven't caught anything." So he says, "Cast the net onto the right side of the boat and you'll find some." And they cast it out on the shore, and lo and behold, they find it, and there's a multitude of fish that they're not able to draw it in. And in my church the other Sunday, FCC, we had a visiting speaker, and he actually spoke on this, and he was really interesting. And he was saying that not all philosophers, or whatever they call them, commentaries on this scripture actually believe that this is a miracle. And the reason they say that is because if you're on the shore, on the beach, and someone's on a boat in the sea, if you're on the boat, you can't see what's in the sea because of the reflection of the waves in the water. But if you're on the beach, then you can see to the side of the ship whether there's a shoal of fish. So Jesus being on the beach, it wasn't a miracle, or so they say, but that he could just see that there was a shoal of fish on this side of the boat and not on the other. But I don't believe that. I think it's a miracle, and so did the preacher who was speaking on that day. It was a miracle. I think it's a miracle as well. So yeah, they're just wrong about that. But yeah, so Jesus just says, "Cast your nets onto the other side and you will catch them." And they did, and obviously they had so many that they couldn't bring them all in. And then another thing that I thought was really interesting about this one is in verse 11, where it says that they were full of large fish, 153. And I just thought, did they really count all those fish? How did they know how many fish? Did they have time to count them? Because it goes on to say then that they cooked breakfast and Jesus broke the breakfast and made it for them. I just wonder, how did they know how many fish they caught? Did they take the time to count them or not? And I don't know, that's just something that come to me that I wonder, and maybe I need to look a bit further, but that's just a random thought I had. And then moving on, it goes on to where Jesus is talking to Peter, and he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" He's virtually restoring him back to the ministry, because we read earlier in John where Peter denied Jesus 3 times in between when Jesus got taken in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was actually crucified. And I just noticed here in this passage, Jesus actually asks Peter, does he love him 3 times? In verse 15 it says, "Peter, do you love me? Feed my lambs." In verse 16 it says, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" And he says, "Yes, Lord." He says, "Tend my sheep." And then in 17 he says, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" And Peter was grieved and said to Jesus, "Of course you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." I just thought that was interesting that back earlier in John, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And here Jesus is asking Peter to confirm his love for Jesus 3 times. I just thought maybe he had to say it 3 times so that each one cancelled out the previous denial. And this was to cancel out and say, "Yeah, I do love you." And I just thought that was interesting, that previously he denied him 3 times, and now he's saying he loves him 3 times. It is basically cancelling out his past sins and his past denial. And then at the end it just says, it's basically just saying, I really like this, that last verse 25, that there were many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written down one by one, I suppose not even the world itself could contain the books that would be written. And I just think that's so cool, because just these few Gospels, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, you've got so many miracles and things that Jesus did, and yet they're saying, but there's so much more, and you just can't imagine. It'd be cool to get your hands on some of the other stuff that happened that's not actually written in the Bible, just to see what Jesus did. And yeah, I bet there's so much that we would just be blown away even more by what Jesus did when he was walking around on the earth. And I just think that's such an awesome way to finish the gospel. Like, Jesus did all this amazing and fab stuff, but there's like so much more, and that unfortunately we don't get to hear about it in the gospel because it's just not big enough. And then finally in Psalm 69, we hear that the psalmist, which I think was David, was having a bit of a bad day, to say the least. And it says that the waters surround me up to my neck. And he's basically feeling a bit inundated. You know, I don't know, I quite like swimming, and if you're in the pool and you're in the deep end, it's alright if you know how to tread water and stuff, but if your feet's not on solid ground, then you could feel a bit like, oh my gosh, what's going on, I'm going under, sort of thing. And it's not a nice feeling at all. And the psalmist here is just feeling inundated. I think he's not having a very good day, and it sort of sounds like he's at the end of his tether. And I just think it's really good that if we feel stuck, if we're feeling like, I can't go on, sort of thing, it's good to cry out to God. It's good to tell him how you're feeling, because he knows anyway, and he's not going to moan when we moan. He's not going to say, oh, please shut up. But he is going to listen to us, and it's good sometimes to write it down, how you're feeling, if you're feeling a bit pressurized or whatever. But just don't worry about it. Just give it all to God and hand it over to him. And that's it tonight. So keep going, and I'll probably speak to you soon.